Our words matter. Our stories matter. I recently had an experience that made it really clear to me how important it is to pay attention to the types of stories we tell our children. A young woman from Sabine High School, right up the road, emailed me a little while back, and she told me that last year she participated in a UIL competition. It's a UIL essay competition, and she placed 6th in the state. You know, normally when you participate in UIL events, they categorize it by small school, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A, all that. Her competition was just statewide. They lumped all the schools in there together. So you know she was handling her business to place 6th in the state. So she said, I'm going to participate this year. I'd like to interview you for my essay. I was thinking, any baby handling her business like that? I'm glad to help. Sure, whatever you need. Everything was fine with that exchange until I clicked on the link she sent to me that explained what the essay competition actually was. I copied it word for word so that you could understand what I was going through as it kind of sank in what she was asking me to do. Click, up pops the Barbara Jordan Historical Essay Competition. I was like, what? Competition theme: African Americans in Texas, past and present. Essays should focus on individuals or groups who are not well-known figures, but who have made significant contributions to African American history or culture in Texas. I'm sitting at my computer at work, and it's slowly but surely dawning on me that this girl is talking about writing an essay about me. Not like I'm contributing some type of quote or I'm guiding her to whatever it is. No, she's talking about me. And I'm sitting up here, I'm not joking. I got on the phone with my husband. I got on the phone with some girlfriends, and I was like, I don't think that this is gonna work. I was like, you know, I'm Anissa Nicole from down there in Longview. You know, Nissa, from, you know, hanging out over at Broaden off 16th Street. Well, it's MLK now for those of you who are under the age of 40. But you understand what I'm saying? I was like, any essay we're writing with Barbara Jordan's name on it, I'm not really sure that I'm not sure that I'm doing enough for all that. Because come on, Barbara Jordan, the first African American elected to the Texas Senate after Reconstruction. The first Southern African American woman elected to the United States House of Representatives. I was intimidated. There's no need me standing up here lying to y'all. And I asked her, are you sure? I was like, because I don't know about that. I mean, she said yes. She said yes. She said, you are a person people listen to. They see you all the time, and what you say matters, and you influence and shape our community. I mean, come on, don't get me wrong. I have an ego. I mean, I do work on TV. You gotta have a little bit of an ego to do that. I have a whole lot of confidence in my motivational speaking. I teach online classes. I do outreach. You know, I feel good about all that. But I'm still looking at her like, okay, whatever, if you insist. So she sends this child is thorough. I see how she got 6th in the state, because when I say she was thorough, that list of, I'm not joking, the title said basic questions. There were like 20 of them. I was like, basic? I was like, what happens when we get to advanced? So when she sent it, and a few down, where you were born, your mom and dad's name, what they did, all that good stuff, where you went to school, your degrees, blah, 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 blah. There's this question that it took me aback, surprisingly took me aback, because I'm not joking. I wasn't expecting it to bring up the emotion it brought up in me. The question was, how has your culture affected you as far as your upbringing, your determination, and your goals in life. I'm going to repeat that so that you know where I'm going with this. She asked, how has your culture affected you as far as your upbringing, your determination, and your goals in life? Y'all follow it? And my mind and my heart, and most importantly, my spirit, took an unexpected turn. And I've spent the last 10 or so years getting back in touch with my spirit, so wherever it leads me, that's where I'm going. So I sit down, and what I thought would have been a couple of sentences ended up being basically tonight's talk. It ended up being an essay, and don't let the word essay scare you, it's not like 800 pages. But I am going to read to you. It's going to be a little bit different than my previous talks, if you have ever seen me. I normally do a lot of audience participation, things like that, but this is a little different because this is highly personal. And if I get emotional, don't worry about it. Just bear with me. You'll see why. And we're just going to keep it moving. But I wanted to give you a heads up. So this is what I wrote back to her. Starting the essay right here. I struggled with how to express this effectively and wondered about the correctness of sharing it at all. But I believe in speaking truth, so I will answer this question honestly by saying that as a Black girl and woman, I spent much of my life trying to prove wrong the negative things I was told about people like me, and equal, if not more time, believing them. During my childhood, from the moment I understood language, over the course of a day, sometimes over the course of the same conversation, I would hear Black people, and here I am talking about authority figures, express frustration with white people's prejudices, and then turn around and repeat the same negative beliefs about Black people without realizing they had bought and were now enthusiastically selling the lies they had been told about themselves. For the purposes of this letter, this essay, I'm not going to use the actual N-word. I'm going to substitute Negro. But as you hear me say that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The next paragraph goes, Negroes and flies, the more I'm around Negroes, the more I like flies. See, that's what I say about Negroes. They ain't worth a quarter. You can't count on Negroes to do nothing right. I'm going over to them white folks. These same people, adults, authority figures, people I loved and people who loved me, would then turn around, give me a task, and if I didn't move fast enough, say, Negro, didn't you hear me? I said to get it done. Think about that for a minute. They were passing the negative stereotypes right along to the next generation. As I grew older, I realized this was happening, and I started making an effort to point this out to myself and others as it was happening, and I was met with ferocious resistance and outright hostility as people would protest saying, that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant. But if you have dark brown hair, and you are told all your life by people you love and respect, family, friends, people who love you, that brunettes are stupid, untrustworthy, unattractive people, then what are you going to believe about yourself? I am not pointing fingers, and I am not placing blame. I understand that they were expressing what they were taught about themselves. They grew up in a system where it was the norm for them to walk out of their house looking their best, minding their business, to go downtown to buy another sharp dress or a suit and have a stranger tell them, "Negro, you can't be here." Or if they were looking too prideful, like they were feeling like they were full of themselves, "Negro, who you looking at? Who you eyeballing?" Some of you, I'm not telling you anything new because you've lived it. It goes on to say, traveling to the area where my mother grew up, my parents regularly passed a sign that said, "Negro, don't let the sun set on you." I have a family member who is only 7 years older than I am, who has vivid memories of a whites-only water fountain at the Russ County Courthouse. His mom had to explain to him that even though he was thirsty, he couldn't use that water fountain that was right there. That sign is gone. That water fountain is still there. And he sees it every time he goes in to conduct business. He was a member of the first class to attend integrated classrooms from the first grade all the way through high school graduation in the system from which I graduated. He started first grade after violent protests by the parents, family, friends, and neighbors of the children who were now his classmates. He was taught by the same teachers who were already in that system during the violent protests to keep that system free of people like him. Teachers who started teaching when the education system was segregated and they were caught off guard when halfway through their careers, they were stuck in a classroom with black children. It was not the kind of environment that would make you feel good about that aspect of yourself, one that is so obvious for everyone to see and you can't do anything to change it. I too had some of those teachers. Some of them did the best they could. There were others who didn't do much to hide the fact that they were not pleased. As an adult, I look back and I realize that much of that, for many of them, they were dealing with a foreign culture, for all that we were Americans and living in the same city. I had some who really tried to treat each child with the love, compassion, and respect every good teacher exhibits in the classroom. I had others who weren't trying very hard at all. Often the lines were so blurred, it was hard to understand why despite being a bright student who lived to please, I left those classrooms feeling less than. I remember an elementary school assignment to write about a figure in American history, one I admired. I proudly wrote about Phyllis Wheatley, a now famous poet in the 1700s who was the first woman of African descent to publish a book of poetry. My teacher wouldn't accept it because she had never heard of her. And the Black encyclopedia I used wasn't a legitimate source. The problem, one of many with that, of course, being that at that time, few so-called mainstream sources were writing much about the contributions of people of African descent, with the exception of George Washington Carver, because everybody knew he was given credit for creating peanut butter. Would you please bring me some tissue? Thank you. But even as a child, I knew it was statistically impossible for only a couple of black people to have contributed to the advancement of U.S. culture. But I had teachers who told me in no uncertain terms that they didn't exist, or if they did, they didn't count. That hurt. For someone who rarely saw anyone who looked like her on TV or on toy store shelves or in magazines, except for Ebony or Jet, it meant a lot to have some proof that people who looked like me mattered, that we weren't all prostitutes, pimps, slaves, or head-bowed, mumbling, "Yes, a master servants." You have to remember that those multicultural dolls that are so popular today, they were not sold when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. My mother had a Raggedy Ann doll made with dark cloth so that every doll I had didn't have white skin. I heard people say on a frighteningly regular basis, black people say on a frightening regular basis that black people just don't do that. And that being, that is like being astronauts, bankers, chiefs of police, or presidents. I had people, adults and peers, question me being in honors classes because being a member of the debate team and playing the oboe and band wasn't what black people did. If you hear something often enough, even if you don't want to believe it, the message seeps in. The tragedy is that my generation and the generation after me were doing the same things. Until I became aware of what was happening, I was doing the same thing. You can only do better when you know better. So can you imagine what it was like for people the generation before that, and the generation before that, and the generation before that, and the generation before that? You don't have to go very far until you reach my husband's great-grandmother, who died when he was 22 years old. 22 years old. And she was raised by parents who were the first generation living free after decades of their family being enslaved. We're not talking about 400 years ago. And that is why, as I continue trying to understand the whys, I give credit to and have the utmost respect for those who came before me, people who not only survived, but in many cases thrived in inexcusable circumstances. It is also why I sought out and truly appreciate people like my youth group leaders, who volunteered with organizations like Top Teens of America to encourage black youth to broaden their horizons and say positive things to me and other black teenagers about who they were and who they could be. And I thank every single person who ever organized one of the many Black History Month programs in which I participated as a child. I used to think that honoring them meant I had to be perfect so that the world could see that we weren't all like that, whatever that might be. I have been consciously trying to root out those hidden, sometimes well-intentioned, but painful beliefs about what it means to be black. I may not get to all of them, but I can sure do my best to not spread them. Those limiting beliefs about blackness. I can do that by encouraging conversations about possibilities and successful living, not despite of that aspect of your background, but because of who you are and all of the experiences and characteristics that make you who you are. For me, that's embracing myself as a woman of African descent who was born and raised in East Texas and once again makes it her home, who grew up on what was openly called the black side of town. That's where the essay ends. I want to wrap it up by saying this to you. Our ancestors were trained to think poorly of themselves because it helped prop up the economic system that depended on enslaving human beings for profit. That system worked better when those enslaved people thought less of themselves, thought of themselves as property, little better than animals. Books were even written about how to oppress and break a person's spirit. People who have high self-esteem don't make for easily managed slaves. Fear, physical intimidation, and psychological warfare with words as weapons kept that system humming right along. I don't fault our ancestors for thinking poorly of themselves and speaking poorly of themselves. It's what they were taught to do. They were survivors. Thanks to their strength and their determination and their will to live, they survived long enough to give us life. And I am eternally grateful to them. I also respect them enough to know that they would want us to continue to move and grow. That means treating ourselves better, and treating our loved ones better, and treating our children and our neighbors children better. I ask you to consider that the best way to honor our ancestors and their struggles and their accomplishments and their survival, their very fact of living, may simply be to treat yourself with more respect. Our children watch us. They see how we treat ourselves. They certainly pay attention to how we treat them. I am not here to preach to you or judge you. I am here to ask you to remember that what we do and say today is tomorrow's African American history. You don't have to be a religious person to understand deep within your spirit and your soul that the tongue has the power of life and death, to build or to destroy, to uplift or to tear down. I ask you to listen to you talk about yourself. I ask you to listen to yourself as you talk with your friends. I ask you to listen to yourself as you talk about other Black people, and especially I ask you to listen to yourself as you talk to and around young Black people. Then ask some very basic questions. Is it kind? Is it helpful? Is it true? If it's not, you may have never heard this before, but you will hear it tonight. If it's not, you deserve better. You are the descendants of some of the most incredible survivors the world has ever seen. And you deserve to be treated as such by yourself and by others. So if you remember nothing else I said tonight, if you remember nothing else about this experience, I ask you to remember that you deserve better.